A young mother set out for her regular morning run but never returned home. Police immediately began an extensive search, and within hours, they started uncovering a series of unsettling clues. What began as a routine local investigation quickly drew national attention, as no one could have anticipated how this case would unfold. Eliza Fletcher was born on November 9, 1987 in Memphis, Tennessee. Her family was a well-known presence in the community. Her grandfather owned a private hardware supply company valued at more than $3 billion. They weren't recognized solely for their wealth, but also for their consistent generosity, regularly supporting local charities and making a genuine difference in the area. Although Eliza was expected to take over the family company one day, she chose a different path. She felt called to become a teacher. She completed her education at a private high school, continued on to the University of Memphis, and later earned a master's degree in education. But she wasn't only academically gifted. Eliza was a talented athlete as well. She played on her university's soccer team, enjoyed running, and participated in marathons whenever the opportunity came up. After graduating, she accepted a position as a preschool teacher. And from the very beginning, it was clear she had found her calling. Eliza had an effortless way of connecting with children, and they adored her in return. She was also very active in her church community. It was during one of the services that she met a man named Richard. The two started dating, eventually married, and later welcomed 2 sons. From that point on, Eliza devoted herself to raising her boys and pouring her heart into her work at the preschool. She and her husband also loved spending time outdoors. Whenever they had the opportunity, they would head out for a hike, go camping, or take the family on a road trip. Eliza remained committed to her fitness routine as well, running nearly every morning. In 2022, at age 34, Eliza was training for the Boston Marathon, which meant she was running more frequently than ever. To make it all work, she began heading out around 4 a.m. so she could finish her run and still be home in time for breakfast with her family before starting her workday. On the morning of September 2nd, Eliza woke before dawn and headed out for her regular run. She lived close to the University of Memphis and enjoyed running through the campus. Her usual route covered about 4 miles round trip, which typically took her around an hour. But that morning something wasn't right. When her husband woke up and noticed she still hadn't returned, he sent her several texts but received no response. He then tried calling her, but she didn't answer, something completely unlike Eliza. She was scheduled for the early shift at work that day, and she was always punctual and responsible. Realizing something was wrong, Richard didn't wait any longer and contacted the police around 7 a.m. It didn't appear that Eliza had simply wandered off on her own. Her husband explained that she had only taken her phone and a water bottle, nothing that suggested she planned to go anywhere after finishing her run. Since she typically stayed close to the university, police contacted campus administrators and asked them to alert students in case someone dangerous was nearby. Because Eliza's family was well known in Memphis, word of her disappearance spread quickly. Local news outlets picked up the story almost immediately, and within hours, rumors were circulating throughout the city. One of the first theories people jumped to was that her husband might be involved, since in cases like this, the spouse is usually the primary focus early on. People watched his interviews with intense scrutiny, searching for any hint that something might be wrong. But from the outset, investigators had no reason to suspect Richard. All evidence showed he had been at home when Eliza left for her run. Meanwhile, officers canvassed the area and began gathering surveillance footage along her regular route. Before long, they spotted her on camera, running as she always did. Nothing appeared unusual until they reviewed footage from one specific camera positioned not far from the university. What it captured was deeply unsettling. At 4:20 a.m., Eliza jogged past a parked SUV. Moments later, a man stepped out, sprinted toward her, and grabbed her. After a brief struggle, he forced her into the vehicle. The car stayed there for another 4 minutes before driving off with Eliza inside. Now that investigators knew they were dealing with a kidnapping, the case kicked into high gear. More resources were brought in and the priority was clear. To find Eliza alive, the suspect had been caught on camera, but the footage was grainy and didn't give them much to work with. Same with the license plate. It was too blurry to read. Still, detectives did notice something interesting reviewing footage from other cameras. They saw the same SUV drive past Eliza just minutes before the abduction. Even earlier, about 20 minutes before it happened, the car had been circling the area near the university. It looks like the driver was deliberately hunting for someone. After spotting Eliza, the man parked ahead and waited for her to run past. Police released the footage to local media, hoping someone might recognize him. They were able to identify the SUV's make and model, and noted that one of its tail lights was broken. Still, even with that information, finding the suspect was far from straightforward. At the same time, investigators received a new lead. That morning, a passerby discovered a water bottle and a cell phone lying by the side of the road, about 7 miles from where Eliza had been taken, and turned them over to the police. It took several hours to confirm their relevance to the case, but with assistance from her family, detectives were able to verify that the phone belonged to Eliza. It appeared the kidnapper had thrown the phone and water bottle out the car window, but that wasn't all. Lying right next to them, investigators found a pair of men's flip-flops. Police believed they had been discarded along with the other items, which was puzzling. Why would the suspect get rid of his own shoes? One theory suggested the sandals might have been stained with blood, and he was trying to eliminate evidence. This also implied something else. If he had been wearing them barefoot, the flip-flops could contain traces of his DNA. The shoes were quickly sent to the lab for testing while officers continued searching the surrounding area. This find gave detectives a clearer idea of the route the suspect might have taken and helped focus their search, though it ultimately didn't lead to any immediate breakthroughs. Hours passed before detectives finally received a call from the lab. Forensic specialists had successfully extracted a DNA profile from the flip-flops, which matched a record in the FBI's database. The sample belonged to a 38-year-old man named Cleo for Epstein. As expected, having his DNA in the system indicated he had a significant criminal history. For now, detectives had a name and immediately concentrated on locating him. The following day, Saturday, officers spotted Cleo driving. He attempted to flee and briefly evaded them by running into an apartment where his brother lived. However, the police quickly caught up and Cleo was taken into custody. Cleo was immediately brought in for questioning, but he denied any involvement. He insisted he had nothing to do with the abduction and claimed he didn't even understand why he had been arrested. Detectives continued pressing him for information. When they spoke with his brother, what he revealed raised some concerns. He said that on the morning of the abduction, Cleo had come over, thrown some clothes into the laundry, and began scrubbing his car, almost as if his life depended on it, which was highly suspicious. Detectives obtained a warrant to search both Cleo's car and his brother's apartment in hopes of finding evidence. The apartment yielded nothing connected to the abduction, though the brother was arrested after police discovered illegal drugs and weapons inside. Meanwhile, forensic technicians found traces of blood in Cleo's car and testing confirmed it belonged to Eliza. Even after that, Cleo continued to insist he was innocent, refusing to explain what had happened to Eliza. Detectives were left with more questions than answers, clinging to the hope that she might still be alive. But with every hour that passed, that hope grew increasingly faint. The search carried on through Monday until later that evening, when one of the search teams made a call. A woman's body had been discovered in a patch of tall grass on an abandoned property just a few hundred yards from where Eliza's phone had been found. Investigators were nearly certain it was her, but they had to wait until the following day for official confirmation. The medical examiner later verified that the victim had suffered multiple scrapes and abrasions, and the cause of death was a gunshot wound to the head. When her body was found, her shorts were missing, though police later recovered them from a nearby trash bin. Investigators never publicly confirmed whether a sexual assault had occurred, even as Cleo Fursten continued to deny any involvement. Despite his denials, the evidence against him was overwhelming, and he was eventually formally charged with first-degree murder. Given the intense public attention and widespread media coverage, the confirmation of Eliza's death ignited waves of grief and anger throughout Memphis. What followed only intensified that fury. Details of Cleo's criminal history came to light. He first drew police attention at just 11 years old when he was sent to juvenile detention for robbery. But that was merely the start. Between the ages of 11 and 16, Cleo was arrested 16 more times for offenses ranging from petty theft to illegal gun possession, assault, and gang involvement. At 16, he was once again sent to jail, this time for sexually assaulting a man. He served 6 months in juvenile detention before being released into his mother's care. But just 2 weeks later, he was arrested again, this time for kidnapping a well-known attorney at gunpoint. He forced the man into his car and drove around searching for an ATM. When the attorney attempted to withdraw money and started yelling for help, Cleo was arrested, even though he was only 16. Tried as an adult, he was sentenced to 24 years in prison, and served 20 before being granted early release in November 2020. Had he completed his full sentence, he never would have had the opportunity to harm Eliza or anyone else. When Cleo's case made headlines, a woman named Alicia came forward and her account ignited widespread outrage toward law enforcement. She explained that she met Cleo in the summer of 2021 through a dating app. After a few weeks of messaging, he asked her out that very night, giving her an address and telling her to pick him up. When Alicia arrived, Cleo invited her inside. But the moment she stepped into the building, she sensed something was wrong. The place was completely abandoned. There was no way he actually lived there. It later emerged that this was the same abandoned property where Eliza's body would be found. Once inside, Cleo pulled a gun and forced Alicia back into her car where he assaulted her. At the time, Alicia was 4 months pregnant and told Cleo this, hoping it might stop him. But it didn't. After the assault, he walked away, and Alicia drove herself to the hospital and reported the crime to the police. Forensic teams collected DNA evidence, and she provided investigators with his dating profile, which included his name, photo, and phone number. At this point, the obvious question arises. If this assault occurred over a year before Eliza's abduction, and police had everything they needed to arrest Cleo, his DNA, name, photo, and phone number, why was he still free? The answer was frustratingly simple. Law enforcement never completed the case. Despite having all the evidence, they failed to file the report in time. In fact, the DNA sample collected from Alicia's case wasn't even entered into the FBI database until after Eliza was murdered. When public outrage erupted, the police department explained that staffing shortages had prevented them from completing the process. In reality, the system failed Eliza twice. First, by allowing Cleo to be released from prison 4 years early, and second, by neglecting a case that could have sent him back behind bars long before he had the chance to harm anyone else. Desperate for justice, Alicia had even filed a lawsuit against the city, but it was dismissed only after Eliza's death. Cleo eventually faced charges for that earlier crime. But by then, it seemed almost irrelevant. He was already in custody, and prosecutors had announced their intention to seek the death penalty. Throughout it all, Cleo continued to deny any involvement. Surprisingly, his entire family continued to support him. His mother even told reporters she believed her son was innocent because he had told her he hadn't killed anyone, describing him as a kind and good-hearted person. But the reality was that Eliza wasn't even his last victim. Just 1 day before her murder, Cleo, who worked for a cleaning service, showed up for a shift at a movie theater. That evening, Another employee noticed 2 of her credit cards were missing and that someone had already begun using them. When she reviewed the surveillance footage, she saw Cleo taking her cards. One striking detail from the footage was that he was wearing the same sandals he later discarded near Eliza's phone and water bottle. Unfortunately, the woman didn't have the chance to report the theft in time. Those charges were only added to Cleo's growing list after Eliza's murder. Ultimately, he was sent to prison to await multiple trials. The first was for the assault on Alicia, and in May 2024, he was sentenced to 80 years behind bars. Next came the trial for Eliza's murder. Prosecutors initially sought the death penalty, but Cleo was eventually offered a plea deal. He pled guilty in exchange for life in prison without the possibility of parole. After careful consideration, he accepted the deal, and in October 2024, he was formally sentenced, ensuring he would spend the rest of his life behind bars. While he avoided execution, this outcome at least guarantees he can no longer harm anyone. This case became yet another stark example of how the justice system, through early release and years of inaction, allowed a dangerous individual to remain free and continue committing crimes, despite numerous warning signs. In memory of Eliza, thousands of people came together to run the same route where she had been taken, completing the run she never got the chance to finish.